Once again, thank you for tuning in to Classic Credits. On today's episode, we'll be looking at classic Choplifter from 1985. So why Choplifter? If you caught the last episode of Classic Credits, I made mention of Choplifter in the Top Gunner review. They do share some commonalities, and you could kind of make a little story to link those games together. But there is another reason. Choplifter has a unique path among its gaming peers. Most games in the better part of 3 decades had one of three gaming paths. The game either started as an arcade game and was then ported to a gaming console, usually by the original developer. The game was developed in the arcades and it stayed there, usually because the consoles at the time couldn't handle it. Or finally, a game could be developed specifically for home consoles and never have an arcade version. Choplifter is one of few games, actually I can only think of one other one, that started as a home game first. In 1982, Broderbund published a game for the Apple II from an independent developer named Dan Gorlin. This was their first mega hit. Console makers and gamers wanted it badly. Ports of the game quickly followed to the Atari, Commodore, and Coleco systems, as well as many others. Things were going great for Broderbund and Choplifter, but this is the 80s. This is the arcade time, the golden age. In walks Sega. Sega wanted to make a huge impact in North America. They had already had a few successful arcade hits with the likes of Turbo, Pingo, Zaxxon, Star Trek Strategic Operations Simulator, Congo Bongo, and Future Spy. Sega had their eyes on the home market though. They wanted to use the arcades to build some buzz for the new Sega Mark III that was due out in the West in 1986. You guys probably better know this console as the Sega Master System. So with that in mind, they began their big Western push in 1985. They released some great games that year: Heavy Metal, Space Harrier, Hang On, and Pitfall 2: The Lost Caverns. Pitfall 2 happens to be the only other game that started as a home console game first, having been released on the Atari 2600 in 1984. Sega needed more. They needed Game of the Year type games. They found that in a computer game of the year 1982, Choplifter. They not only ported Apple II Classic to the arcades, they improved upon it in many, many ways. So enough of a history lesson. How is the game? It's fantastic. In Choplifter, you fly a rescue chopper that must fly behind enemy lines and rescue POWs. The game has many features it borrowed from other games, but it is this mashup that is what makes it great. The chopper has a turn button similar to Defender by Williams. The chopper can either face left, right, or center. Unlike Defender, the way that you're facing only has a bearing on which direction you are firing and not your movement. It also has multiple modes of fire, which was popularized by Xevious from Namco. Instead of a secondary fire button though, the chopper's center facing mode allows you to take out ground enemies that your normal fire can't. You're actually supposed to be firing at enemies in the foreground. Gorlin wanted Choplifter to be a 3D game, but the technology wouldn't allow it, and this was one of his ways to try and simulate that. You will come across many different air and ground based foes, and they're pretty darn aggressive even on the first level. One interesting thing about the ground structures, such as cannons, they stay destroyed. Considering the amount of things shooting at you, it is a good idea taking out the ground guns as they won't come back. Rescuing the POWs is a little game in and of itself. The POWs can be killed not only by the enemies, but by you. If you shoot them, they die. You can literally squash them with the helicopter if you aren't careful. I hate to say it, but their little screams of death always make me laugh. They also have a cute little thank you when you return them to the base. The game never lets you forget either how you are doing on the POWs. It tells you how many that you've loaded, how many that you've saved, and how many you've let die. Sega added many new features to the game when they released it in the arcades too. Sega added several new environments to the game. They added scoring, music, a fuel gauge, and a really nice graphical facelift that used parallax scrolling to add a good sense of depth to the game. Choplifter was fun in 1985, and it's still fun now. So what of Choplifter's legacy? Well, it's actually a pretty confusing one. It has already been mentioned that the original Apple II version of Choplifter was released for a ton of systems. So what of the arcade version? Were there any home ports? Yes. Jalico brought the game to the NES in 1986, but the real superior home version was the Sega Master System, also released in 1986. It expands on the arcade game even more and is a really good game for the Sega Master System. Many consider the Sega Master System version the definitive version of Choplifter. Choplifter had many sequels and spin-offs, and this is where it gets a little bit confusing. Choplifter actually was part of a trilogy. In Choplifter, you are rescuing POWs from the clutches of the bungling empire. Yes, the bungling empire. There were two other games Broderbund released featuring these guys, Lode Runner and Raid on Bungling Bay. Neither of these games resembled Choplifter in any way other than the antagonist Empire. Then there were more direct sequels. Choplifter 2 was made for the Game Boy by Beam Software, and then it was tweaked and re-released for the Game Boy again, as well as the Game Gear as Choplifter 3. Then there was a Choplifter 3 for the Super NES, again made by Beam Software, but had no direct relation to the portable Choplifter 3 or 2 or whatever you want to call it. Sega released unofficial Choplifter games, but are still considered by some to be parts of the family, so to speak. Air Rescue was released to the arcades in 1991. It was the first-person pseudo 3D game. Sega also then released another game called Air Rescue that was completely different than the Air Rescue arcade game. This home version felt like a natural evolution of Choplifter and is a pretty good game worth checking out. It is truly worthy of the Choplifter name, if it was official, that is. One final version of Choplifter to mention, Choplifter HD by inXile Entertainment, was released for Xbox Live, PlayStation Network, and Windows in 2012. I'd just like to add a personal note here. The first version of this game that I ever played was on my brother's Atari 7800. I played the heck out of it. It was a great port for the pre-Sega arcade version of Choplifter. Post-arcade, I would have to recommend the arcade game itself or the Sega Master System version as the go-to version. Once again, thanks for tuning in to Classic Credits. This one was heavy on the history. I just feel that the history of this game is a pretty unique one. That doesn't mean that it isn't good arcade and console fun. See you next time, where we again hope to show you a game that you may have forgotten or never even heard about.